The Galactic Council's cultural exchange program had brought together the brightest minds from across seven-star systems. In the Grand Assembly Hall of Station Kepler, 442, historians, military strategists, and academics gathered to discuss the evolution of warfare throughout the cosmos. Among them sat Robert Chun, whose presence had been something of an administrative error. Robert was a plumber. A human plumber, to be precise, who had been filling in paperwork for a deep space contractor position when a clerical mistake had registered him as Robert Chun, Strategic Infrastructure Specialist. By the time anyone noticed, he was already aboard the station, and bureaucracy being what it was across multiple species, it seemed easier to let him attend than to process the reversal forms. Elsa Nordstrom, the actual human representative, a decorated military historian from the Terran Defense Academy, had nearly choked on her synthetic coffee when Robert introduced himself at the opening reception. "You're a what?" she had whispered urgently, her blonde hair swinging as she leaned in close. "Plumber," Robert had replied cheerfully, adjusting his worn jacket that looked distinctly out of place among the formal attire. "But hey, I watch a lot of documentaries. I'll try not to embarrass our species." Now, 3 days into the conference, the assembly had moved to practical historical demonstrations. Commander Thexyler, a mantis-like Vrexian with credentials spanning 4 centuries, stood before a holographic display showing an ancient siege scenario. The Battle of Krixtar demonstrated the pinnacle of pre-atomic warfare. Thexyler's translator rendered his clicking speech into smooth galactic standard. Observe how the Vrexian legions utilized gravitational collapse charges to undermine the enemy fortress. The technique required 17 planetary cycles to perfect and has been obsolete for 3,000 years. Polite applause rippled through the audience. Elsa took careful notes, occasionally glancing at Robert, who seemed genuinely engaged, nodding along. The Zafrani delegate, a floating crystalline entity named Charminos, presented next. "My people's contribution to siege warfare was the patient approach, surrounding enemy positions and waiting for resource depletion. Some sieges lasted centuries, but they were inevitably successful. Barbaric but effective," noted a scholarly Ctharian from the back, their tentacles forming shapes of approval. Then Elsa was called to present humanity's historical tactics. She stood, elegant and professional, and brought up a holographic recreation of ancient Earth. "Humans developed numerous siege techniques," she began, highlighting various historical battles. "From battering rams to siege towers, from Greek fire to undermining walls. One particularly interesting technique was used extensively during Earth's medieval period. The sappers would dig tunnels beneath fortress walls, prop them with wooden supports, then burn the supports to collapse the tunnel and bring down the wall above." "Fascinating," Thexyler clicked. "And these techniques are preserved only in your historical records, yes? Like ours, they represent a primitive past your species has transcended." Before Elsa could respond, Robert's hand shot up. Elsa's eyes widened in panic. "Robert, you don't have to." Actually, Robert stood, seemingly oblivious to the prestigious nature of his audience. "That undermining technique still works. I used it yesterday." The hall fell silent. Delegates from a dozen species turned to stare at the human in the worn jacket. Thexyler's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Explain. You engaged in siege warfare yesterday." "What?" No, Robert laughed. "I'm a plumber. But the principle's the same. There was this luxury tower on the station, the Zenith Residential Complex. They had a support column that was blocking access to a burst coolant main. Couldn't cut through it with conventional tools without compromising the structural integrity of 3 floors. He pulled out his personal datapad, bringing up a work order with casual ease. "So I did what those medieval sappers did. Carefully excavated underneath it, set up temporary supports, rerouted the stress load, got access to the pipe, fixed the leak, then reinforced everything back. Same principle, just with hydraulic jacks instead of wooden beams and plasma torches instead of fire." Charminos pulsed with interested colors. "You applied ancient siege warfare to modern infrastructure maintenance." I guess." Robert shrugged. "We call it undermining in the trade, too. It's basic physics. You need to get under something to access what's below. You support it, do your work, then restore it. Builders have been doing it for thousands of years. A Ctherian scholar's tentacles writhed with excitement. The human suggests that their ancient techniques remain practically applicable. Elsa, recovering from her initial mortification, felt her historian's mind engaging. Actually, Robert has a point. Human warfare evolved from our environmental adaptation. We had to manipulate our surroundings to survive. Many military techniques were just applications of construction, farming, or maintenance work. Exactly. Robert warmed to the topic. Like, that Vrexian gravitational collapse thing? That's just controlled demolition. We do that to old buildings all the time. And the Zafrani patient strategy? That's literally how I deal with clogged pipes. Sometimes you can't force it. You just have to wait for the pressure to equalize. Thexiler leaned forward, mandibles clicking rapidly, a sign of deep interest Elsa had learned to recognize. Your species maintains practical continuity with your primitive past? We prefer to think of it as time-tested solutions. Elsa interjected smoothly, her academic training taking over. Humans have always adapted existing knowledge to new contexts. A good idea remains good regardless of age. Robert nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, like, I bet some alien species out there invented a better mousetrap. But back on Earth, the spring-loaded bar trap from the 1800s still works great. Why fix what isn't broken? A murmur ran through the assembly. The concept seemed to genuinely perplex many delegates. The elderly Vrexian strategist, scales dulled with age, spoke up. Our species views outdated techniques as evidence of primitive thinking. To employ ancient methods would be shameful. But that's crazy, Robert said. With the blunt honesty of someone who had no idea, he was contradicting a being who had forgotten more about warfare than Robert would ever know. Some problems don't change. Gravity's still gravity. Structural stress is structural stress. Water still flows downhill. Why would the solutions change? Elsa jumped in, sensing an opportunity. What Robert is illustrating is humanity's practical philosophy, empiricism over ideology. We test what works. If a 1,000-year-old technique solves a modern problem, we use it. We don't discard knowledge just because it's old. Charminos dimmed thoughtfully. This explains much about human military successes. You adapt everything, old, new, alien, domestic. You have no shame about borrowing or reverting. Shame. Robert looked genuinely confused. If someone shows me a better way to fix a pipe, I don't care if they invented it yesterday or 1,000 years ago. I just want the pipe fixed. Thexiler's mandibles clacked and what Elsa had learned was laughter. The human plumber has taught us more about human strategic thinking than 3 days of academic presentations. The assembly erupted in discussion. Delegates clustered together, debating this human characteristic of practical continuity. Elsa found herself at the center of multiple conversations, explaining how human military doctrine deliberately studied ancient battles for applicable tactics, how construction techniques from Roman times still influenced modern engineering, how problem-solving mattered more than prestige. Later, as the session broke for refreshments, Elsa found Robert examining the beverage dispenser with professional interest. You know, you just revolutionized their understanding of human strategic doctrine, she said. Robert looked up, surprised. I just talked about plumbing. You talked about how humans think, Elsa corrected. And apparently, we think very differently than everyone else here. They obsess over innovation and view old methods as primitive failures. We see them as proven solutions waiting for new applications. Huh. Robert successfully coaxed the dispenser into producing something that resembled coffee. So I didn't embarrass us? Elsa smiled. Robert, I think you might have just explained why humans keep winning battles we have no business winning. We'll use a rock if it works better than a laser. A rock's just a kinetic impactor with traditional aesthetics. Robert grinned as the conference continued. Word spread about the human plumber's doctrine. The idea that humans maintain practical continuity with their entire history, treating all knowledge as potentially useful regardless of age. Military strategists began revisiting human conflicts, seeing them not as primitive species punching above their weight, but as a deliberate philosophy of practical adaptation. And Robert? He fixed a leaking atmospheric recycler in the station's engineering deck using a technique he'd learned from a video about Roman aqueducts, completely unaware that he'd started a philosophical revolution in galactic military thinking. Some solutions, after all, are simply timeless.